we need Julian Assange. And one thing I want to say to you today is, it is not only that he is the victim of torture, it is not only that his life is at stake, it is not only we want to save him from a dreadful injustice, we also want to save him because the world needs Julian Assange as a symbol and fighter for liberty in these times.
That was Craig Murray at the very top of the show. Craig Murray at St. Pancras Church in London back in December 2019. One of his hundreds of speeches on behalf of Julian Assange. And I'm Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico live on the fly on WBAI. Craig Murray, who has been generous with his time at this station. He is a regular at Mainstay. He helped build my show. Maybe 20 or 30 times he has appeared over the last 5 years. And now Craig Murray has been convicted and sentenced to 8 months in prison for journalism. That's it. He has been framed. He has been targeted, politically targeted by the powers that be in Scotland. And this is a very, very dire situation. So we're devoting today's show on behalf of Craig Murray. This may be the beginning of the Craig Murray Countdown to Freedom series right here, because we're on this to the very end until Craig is extricated from the legal morass that he now is in the middle of. We have Julian Assange's father, who will be joining us in about 30 minutes. We have Deepa Driver, a close friend of not only Assange, but of Craig Murray. She'll be joining us shortly. And also a great writer who has been following the Craig Murray legal persecution in Scotland, and he'll be joining us in just a few minutes. So we're going to take a break here, a quick break, and I think we're going to play some very nice music and come back and talk to Mohammed El-Masri, the writer who wrote a seminal piece on the proceedings that Craig Murray just underwent. We'll be right back.
When I was young, it seemed that life was so wonderful. A miracle, oh it was beautiful, magical. And all the birds in the trees, well, they be singing so happily. Oh joyfully, oh playfully, watching me. But then they sent me away to teach me how to be sensible, logical, oh responsible, practical. And then they showed me a world where I could be so dependable, oh clinical, oh intellectual, cynical. There are times when all the world's asleep, but questions run too deep for such a simple mind. Won't you please tell me why?
Supertramp Logical Song, which is Craig Murray's favorite tune, so he says. And over the last 5 years and the 25, 30 interviews I've done with him, we've always transitioned or segued into the interview with that tune. And he's a logical guy, so it makes sense. I'm Randy Credico live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in New York City. We are discussing today the recent conviction and the recent sentencing of our dear friend, the great whistleblower, ex-UK senior diplomat, ambassador to Uzbekistan, Craig Murray, also the author of many books. We are being joined now by Mohammed Almazy, who wrote an article recently in the Dissenter that Craig really appreciated, really gave us a great overview of the entire proceedings. Mohammed Almazy writes for a number of great publications such as Jacobin, The Canary, and the Electronic Intifada, and of course Dissenter, where this article recently appeared. Thank you, Mohammed, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let me begin by, you've been following this case from the outset since when he was first charged, am I right?
That's correct. I've covered both the trial as well as the sentencing hearings.
Right. So I remember I was in Belmarsh the last time I saw Craig during the Assange proceedings, the first half at Belmarsh, and when that was over, he was going to cover this trial of Alex Salmond and put it on his website. And then the next thing you know, a year later, he's being tried. So just the genesis of this, what led to Craig Murray being charged? Let's go back to the beginning.
So Craig Murray was charged with contempt of court, and that's relating to the nature of his coverage of the trial of former Scottish First Minister Alex Salmond, who was charged and tried under 14 different sex assault and sex harassment charges. Alex Salmond was ultimately acquitted on all the charges. And Craig Murray had been writing about the investigation, both before Alex Salmond was ultimately tried, and he also published articles during the trial. And essentially it was argued, well, there were three main charges that were levied against Craig, three main contempt of court charges, two of which failed, were dismissed by the trial judges because it was a three-judge panel. There's no jury when it comes to contempt of court. And then in one of them, he was found, he was found guilty. And these relate to the nature of his articles. Essentially, it was argued that Craig had, through the material, the various articles that he'd written, had published information that if somebody out there read those articles, they might be able to piece together information from the various articles that would result in them being able to identify a protected witness in Alex Salmond's trial. Now, it wasn't actually argued that this did happen, merely that it could happen. And this is known as jigsaw identification. So being able to piece together pieces in a puzzle or a jigsaw. According to a statement from Craig Murray's family, this is the first known case of somebody being convicted in Scotland of contempt of court through jigsaw identification. And it's argued that by the prosecution and ultimately by the judges who found against Craig, that in so doing, he violated a court order that was issued by the trial judge in Alex Salmond's trial, which prohibited the publication of information that may likely result in the identification of a protected witness. Now, of course, Craig denied this. He argued that there were other outlets, including mainstream outlets, that had also published jigsaw information. In fact, they submitted examples where they said that there is more jigsaw information in these articles than anything I published. And they also argued that any errors that may have happened would have been in good faith. So it wasn't found that he had directly identified anybody, merely to the combination of an article in March and another article in March, an article in January, an article in April. If somebody had combined the various pieces of information together, that they might be able to identify a witness. And ultimately the judges found against him in relation to some of the articles, if you read their judgment.
Well, the judge in the contempt case is the same judge that oversaw the trial of Alex Salmond, right?
That's correct.
And so I find that a little conflict of interest there. And so this case seems to me to have been politically motivated. And there are many out there who argue that the whole thing was a conspiracy. Can you give us an overview of the conspiracy allegations against the state in the Salmond investigation and the charges against him?
Yes, so emails, bits and pieces of information started to emerge in 2019, in fact, of what appeared to be, not what appeared to be, what definitely were communications via email and text message between senior civil servants in the Scottish government, senior ranking members of the Scottish National Party bureaucracy, which Alex Salmond is a former leader of the Scottish National Party, and even some of the alleged victims in Alex Salmond's case. And without going into the details of those emails, it basically, it looked like there were agreements, which you could describe as a conspiracy to smear Alex Salmond. And in fact, so much information had come out before Salmond was even tried in the end in March last year, or March 2020, that he launched what's known as a judicial review against the Scottish government, challenging the legality of the investigation that was brought against him. And ultimately, a judge, a High Court judge in Scotland, found in Alex Salmond's favor. He won hundreds of thousands of pounds in costs and legal costs. It was almost a record, I think, at the time. It was noted as being a record level of win. And basically, the judge had found that the investigation into Alex Salmond had been unlawful and tainted by apparent bias. That's a quote from the High Court judge. But he was the trial nonetheless continued. So that he won that High Court victory, reviewing the investigation into him, but he still was put on trial. And then ultimately was found not guilty. He was acquitted on all charges. Now, Craig Murray, like Alex Salmond, is a known supporter of the pro-independence movement in Scotland. And the Scottish National Party, the SNP, was able to gain seats largely on the basis of its support. I'm not saying that everyone who voted for the SNP voted because they want independence, but the SNP was famous for being a pro-independence party, to separate from England and Wales. Yes, so they become their own state. And this trial, the investigation prosecution of Alex Salmond, occurs within a climate of a very public split within the SNP, where Alex Salmond was accusing the current First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, of being, if you like, of dragging her feet on the independence question, as though she was kicking the can down the road. And so there's been all kinds of splits seen within the SNP. And Craig Murray was known not only to be supportive of independence, but close to Alex Salmond and very critical of the prosecution of him. And many of the articles he published made that criticism clear, where he was noting and quoting other people and bringing up his own opinions as to the nature of the trial. He basically described the prosecution of Alex Salmond, as a politically motivated stitch-up. And so this is the overall environment and the context in which many people consider the charges against Craig Murray as being also politically motivated, because how come nobody else was prosecuted for jigsaw identification if indeed this was their concern? Why did they wait till the end of the trial to raise this as an issue if they really believed that people were being identified, albeit indirectly, from these articles? How come they didn't immediately raise this with the judge and then tell him to take down the articles? So it's basically, there's an argument of selective prosecution, if you like, that can be.
It seems to me to be that it was selective prosecution, because others, including Tommy Robinson, they may have been charged, but they were found innocent, and they were not charged with jigsawing. I think there were two or three other cases that you point out in your article. But it really it baffles me that the judge, Darien, Lord Darien, was in charge of this trial. It seems like she was angry, and this was like revenge because, Salmond won his case. Now, the jury, I'm sure, was not looking at Craig Murray's writings. That's not what determined the outcome of the acquittal. Do you think it had anything to do with the acquittal? Craig Murray's so-called jigsawing, which is totally opaque to me. I don't see any jigsawing.
No, although the prosecution did not argue in that case that the trial was in any way unfair, that it impacted the the ultimate verdict. They did argue that 2 articles he published were highly likely to prejudice the jury, but that charge was dismissed ultimately by the judges. So in this case, in the Jigsaw case, it wasn't so much about influencing the jury as it was so much about the idea that there are these witnesses who have a protective order. You're not allowed to reveal their identities because this was a sex assault trial, and we believe that these articles increase the likelihood that somebody could be identified. It is important to note that the threshold that was agreed by the judges was they sided with the prosecution in terms of the interpretation of what the threshold should be. So the defense argued it should be a narrow threshold, meaning that could a general member of the public read these articles and then piece together the identity? And ultimately, the judges did not side with that position. The legal test they accepted was, could somebody who already had intimate knowledge of who these people were, just say friends of the complainants in Alex Salmond's case, just say they didn't know that they were the alleged victims, if they had intimate knowledge and they were able to piece together information from the articles, well, then that's enough for you to be in violation of contempt of court. I do want to say, though, on the Tommy Robinson case, that was in England, so that's a different legal jurisdiction. Tommy Robinson was found guilty in 2 separate cases for contempt of court for actually filming outside of court, including harassing defendants in trials, going in and out. And in his case, despite being found guilty in 2 separate contempt of court proceedings, the total sentence he got was 9 months. And this was for, if you like, much more direct violation of contempt of court, because he was outside making pronouncements of guilt. He was outside trying to get the defendants on camera just when the jury was trying to come to its verdict. And that's quite serious. You're not allowed to do that here.
We're short on time here. I want to get to the sentencing. And at sentencing, you got 8 months, and they wanted him to turn himself in just a few days, just on the heels of him testifying in this major case in Spain, in Madrid, in the UC Global case, the spying of Julian Assange. And Craig was one of those, myself a little bit, Craig was one of those who was spied on, and he was going to be a key witness. So this comes at a very strange juncture, wanting him to stay, turn his passport, and not be able to testify. Craig has been a thorn in the side of the powers that be, not only in Scotland, but the UK in general, rather. He exposed torture that the Brits overlooked in Uzbekistan, the treatment of Julian Assange, and a whole bunch of other shenanigans, exposing their war crimes. He's the type of guy, a dissenter that looks like they'd like to neutralize. Hugh Kerr, who I know, a close friend, a former member of the European Parliament, came out and said this was a complete disgrace. You spoke to Hugh Kerr and others. And what was the General John Pilger feeling about this trial and the sentencing?
They believe that it's politically motivated. They believe that the sentencing itself was much too high. I gave you the example of Tommy Robinson, who only got 1 month higher than Craig. They also believe that the way that Jigsaw identification is being interpreted and applied is a danger to journalists and others who would cover trials. So they're very critical of the situation and very concerned. I would say Hugh Kerr, in addition to being a former MEP, was also a former Vice Chancellor of the Scottish Executive Council of the National Union of Journalists. So he's also a journalist as well himself. So yes, there's a lot of concern, both about the nature of the prosecution, what feels like selective prosecution, but also about the level, the severity of the sentencing as well.
Now, where does he go from here? He has an appeal coming up. She gave him a few weeks and said that he's got to turn himself in. How far can this go ultimately before he really, at his age, 62, he's admitted, he's shown his papers and his recent blog that he's not in great physical condition. I had him on my show one day, and he just went through a major operation a couple years back. So I know he's not in great physical condition. And being, he's got like a 4-month-old child. So this is not a opportune moment for Mr. Murray to be going to prison.
That's correct. There were various issues submitted in mitigation: his age, his past good character, no previous convictions, pulmonary conditions as well, as you noted. Basically, he's got an appeal to the Supreme Court, the UK Supreme Court. However, it's very limited in the scope that you can appeal, because the Scotland has its own criminal legal system, separate from England and Wales. So he can only really appeal on human rights grounds if there is an argument about due process violations in terms of the European Convention of Human Rights, or the right, perhaps infringement of the freedom of speech and freedom of the press, so Article 6 and Article 10 of the European Convention. But that's a very high bar. And even then, you still have to get permission to appeal. So they'll first apply for permission from the High Court, the same court that rendered the verdict, right? If permission is denied, then they'll seek permission from the Supreme Court. And if permission is granted, they'll make their argument. If they're unsuccessful, they may be able to then make a further claim to the European Court of Human Rights. But after that's all done, he could have easily have served his sentence of 8 months.
Right.
Already.
So there is some time. Oh, I see. He could be in jail while he's appealing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, ultimately that could end up happening unless they're prepared to stay his, extend his, keep him out of prison while he's appealing. It depends on the court, you know. So,
Right.
so the process could end up being the punishment, even if something happens to the conviction, it's somehow reversed.
In the case of Julian Assange, that's exactly what's happening. 2 years awaiting this extradition, this bogus extradition request by the U.S. Mohammed, we're going to be following you on Twitter and follow you. I know you're going to stay on top of this. We'll have you back very soon as the process unfolds. Thank you, Mohammed Almazi, and we look forward to your future writings on the Craig Murray case and others. Thank you very much. We'll be right back with Deepa Driver, another friend of Craig Murray's, who's going to share some of her thoughts in just 1 minute. All right, we'll be right back. We are back. I'm Randy Credico live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in the Big Apple here in New York City. Free Speech Radio, WBAI.org. We are discussing today the conviction and the sentencing of heavy sentencing of Craig Murray, the whistleblower, the journalist, the author, human rights crusader, and former FCO ambassador to Uzbekistan from the UK. Joining us now is Dr. Deepa Driver, who we had on the Assange Countdown the Freedom Show 8 months ago, discussing the organizing around the movement to free Assange. A great organizer. She is a labor leader. She is a professor. She's got a doctor there. She's the doctor, and she knows Craig really well. In fact, I think you spoke with him recently. Dr. Driver, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Randy.
Yes. So let me ask you, when was the last time you saw Craig? Was it before the trial or after the trial?
It was before the sentencing, and I saw him over the weekend at the International Festival of Whistleblowing, Dissent and Accountability. Craig's original sentencing date was Friday, and we thought that, you know, should things not turn out right, he would not be with us on the Saturday because he would be otherwise engaged at Her Majesty's pleasure. But then the sentencing hearing moved to the Tuesday, and Craig made the effort to come and stand in solidarity with a huge number of whistleblowers and activists and lawyers and journalists and activists who had gathered at the International Festival. And Craig was on a panel with Mohamedou Ould Slahi. You may remember him from the film The Mauritanian. Mohamedou was tortured and incarcerated at Guantanamo for 14 years before being released without charge. And a film has been made about him and his lawyer, Nancy Hollander. And Mohamedou was one of the people who was at the festival, because at the festival we had various sessions where people talked both of the impact of the things that were whistleblown on, as well as the costs that whistleblowers paid. We had politicians and journalists and activists and lawyers talking about the context as well. And Craig was on this wonderful panel with Marjorie Cohn and Mohamedou and Andy Worthington, who's I think been on your show as well. And Craig was telling us about his experiences of whistleblowing, but also bringing it kind of up to date by a real act of, you know, this is a man who's due to be sentenced, who's got a newborn baby, who's sacrificed a huge amount to let the truth come to light. And yet, when he was granted a couple of extra days at home before the sentencing for whatever administrative reasons, he actually made the effort to come and stand in solidarity with Mohamedou. Mohamedou was treated so appallingly at Guantanamo. He was sexually tortured. He was beaten. He was told at times that his mother was in the next room being tortured, and he would have to admit to things. You know, the horrors that these people saw were, of course, revealed by Julian Assange, another person who is now sitting in Belmarsh prison, another truth teller. And Craig, of course, did this wonderful coverage, you know, blow by blow coverage of each and every detail of Julian Assange's extradition hearings in September and the verdict in January, and of course in February as well. And Craig's got this wonderful ability to marry both political understanding and almost this very humane approach to the law, this understanding of the context within which the law operates and what is right and what is wrong. So he was telling us about all of that at the festival.
Well, you went to, you were a court observer. It must have been really shocking to see the treatment that he was accorded, and the fact that he was found guilty. This genteel man, the man who has got a big heart and wouldn't harm anyone. He's done so much great work, and to see someone like this basically being persecuted, crucified almost, in my opinion, it must have been very heartbreaking for you, since you've known him for a while.
I've known Craig mainly through his work on Assange. And I think when we, at least for me, when I've always seen Craig as this shining example of understanding what the law is really for. And so we were only allowed to dial into his extradition hearing. I was one of the legal observers. And so I phoned into this hearing. And when the original hearing took place, I was surprised by the range of things that were said, including that, you know, the information that many other journalists had clearly disclosed far more than Craig had, yet Craig had been singled out for prosecution. The efforts that Craig had gone to respect the privacy of the individuals concerned, of course, and that the court took a view on. And more recently, I think, the disclosures around Craig's health. and the severity of the medical conditions that he suffers from, including, what was quite astonishing was that it was said that Craig couldn't do his punishment as community service because he was too ill to do that. And so it was quite, I think Craig himself has said how shocked he was, not shocked, but disappointed perhaps, that in this situation, he was sentenced to 8 months in prison. I think Craig is one of those people who is quite brave, and it took a lot of courage to set out in front of a relatively open court, I would say, what those medical situations were in mitigation. So it is quite sad that for a first offence, for a man of 62 who's never, intentionally breached the law, and this idea of the way in which jigsaw identification has been interpreted, which to a certain extent worries many campaigners on free speech, because it means that journalists will find it very difficult, in the case of protected witnesses, to report anything of the defense case, which, we always have this presumption of innocence, even when it's a protected, not witness protected, individual about whom the case is. So to find that this presumption of innocence, which is also, of course, driven by the ability to state your side of the case, is something that somebody like, who's accused of such offences can never do. And this is really worrying. So Craig's case is important not just because he was prosecuted for contempt of court, but also for the kind of punishment that he's got. And lastly, I guess just very briefly to say that Craig was due to testify in Spain, and this was in relation to a trial in relation to the Spanish firm UC Global, which was used by the Ecuadorians to monitor the embassy at which Julian Assange was. And in this instance, Craig giving his testimony in person was particularly important because obviously it's in a foreign court. The rapport, etc., with the prosecution and the witnesses is very difficult. And so it was really important for Craig to be there, and now he won't be able to. And he's
amazing. It's amazing. We have a few minutes left. We are talking with Dr. Deepa Driver, who, amongst other things, she wears a lot of hats, is on the steering committee of the Labor Campaign for Free Speech. Now, this, what has happened, the aftermath of the trial and the sentencing of Craig Murray, does that, to you, send a chilling effect to journalism as a whole in the UK?
I think it sends a very strong message to independent journalists. Firstly, there is a concern that independent journalists are being singled out over and above mainstream journalists. Secondly, journalists who are quite critical, who have, said things in the past, will probably feel a little bit nervous, a lot nervous, about reporting on complex cases. Those who go into the courts will be particularly nervous. I think the way in which jigsaw identification is taught about, and I know you spoke to Mohammed El-Mazi about this in some detail, so I won't repeat it, but this really prevents people from speaking their mind about issues which are of great importance. And so the Labour Campaign for Free Speech is, of course, very concerned about this, because of the way in which many truth tellers have been silenced, and the mainstream media has failed repeatedly because they have repeated propaganda lines from the elites who are in power, either because they want access or because they are so brainwashed. So it is really important to have independent journalists like Craig be supported, and I would urge others to support him at very, very difficult time.
Yeah, go to Craig Murray's website and you can support his defense fund. And what else can people do? We have 1 minute. Is there any organizing around this, as there has been for Julian Assange for the last 10 years, vigils, rallies, any public campaigns that you foresee in the immediate future?
Well, certainly those who are, many of us who are campaigning for Julian Assange are very aware of how much Craig has sacrificed, and certainly we are all coalescing around Craig. I guess there is no immediate defense organization to highlight, but what I would say is that there are events which we're trying to organize around Craig. The Labour Campaign for Free Speech is particularly interested in talking about this. So please follow us and we will provide more information as we go through.
Okay, I want to thank you very much, Dr. Driver, and we hope to have you back on soon with some glad tidings. We have to go. We're going to take a quick break and come back with Julian Assange's father, who is very concerned about what happened to Craig, and that is Mr. John Shipton. We'll be right back.
Der Haifisch, der hat Zähne und die trägt er im Gesicht. Und McKeith, der hat ein Messer, doch das Messer sieht man nicht. An dem schönen blauen Sonntag liegt ein toter Mann am Strand und ein Mensch geht um die Ecke, den man Mackie Messer nennt. Und Schmulmeier bleibt verschwunden und so mancher reiche Mann und sein Geld hat Mackie Messer, den man nichts beweisen kann.
That was Lottolania, Mac the Knife. I'm Randy Critical. This is Randy Critical live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in New York City, Free Speech Radio. So we are continuing our discussion today, our special program on the persecution of Craig Murray, our good friend here at WBAI, a good friend of Julian Assange, a good friend of all oppressed people around the world. And as promised, we are joined now by I believe, who has become a very dear friend of Craig Murray, and that is the father of Julian Assange, and a dear friend of mine. I've become a dear friend of, you've become a dear friend of mine, John Shipton. Thank you for participating in this special program.
Good to see you again, Randy. A pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Looking forward to our next dinner down there in the Catskills.
Well, you're going to have to come back real soon, and hopefully Craig will be here, and so will Nils Melzer, and Gabriel.
My God, that'll be a riot.
We'll go deer hunting, okay? We go deer hunting, but you know, you and I had some very interesting and deep discussions when you were here about a range of issues. But you know, Craig Murray came up a lot. And I remember the last time I saw Craig Murray was with you at Belmarsh, and you were sitting together, not only in the gallery, but in the dining room. So you and Craig became, I would imagine, very good friends during the process at Belmarsh.
Yes, and in the February hearing, we sat together for the full 3 weeks, and then I went up to Craig's place and spent a few days up there.
Up in Edinburgh.
Edinburgh, yeah. Yeah, he is a very generous and warm host. I can recommend popping into Craig's place.
Well, I was at Craig's place too back in 2017. and spent 3 days with him and his wife and his son, Cameroon. And I must tell you, you are right that that is like the most hospitable situation to be in if you're visiting Scotland. Am I correct?
Yeah, it is. And he took me on a tour of the famous landmarks of Edinburgh, among them the original, the first place where the, what do they call themselves? The semi-religious group, the Masons, where the Masons had their first meeting and first meeting house. He took me there, yeah, and the other artifacts of Edinburgh. Very interesting city, and a good historian. He was able to bring out of his bag of tricks the stories of the life of Edinburgh. You know, very
Yeah.
good city, Edinburgh.
Me too. I mean, I did the same thing with him. He took me around. He took me to where Adam Smith is buried, and many other great progenitors of the Scottish Enlightenment. It was quite a tour. He could be a great tour guide. He's just an all around great individual. And as I said to Deepa, the last guest, he's genteel, he's generous, and the situation that he is in right now, that he may be going to jail for 8 months. When you found out about that, how did it affect you?
It's just appalling, the insecurity of one state or another, sort of destroying the lives of correspondents and journalists and historians who write accurately. So that's happened to Julian Assange, and now it's happening to Craig, that his life is being destroyed for some to save the second raters that currently run Scotland from embarrassment. Nothing more, just embarrassment.
Well,
So
you know,
really, his reporting. Sorry.
Go ahead. I was going to get to that. His reporting on
Craig is something of a magician. I sat next to him for 3 weeks every day, watching him take notes for the reportage on the Julian Assange hearing, and he would seemingly be asleep, and he'd just write these notes, these little hieroglyphs on a piece of paper, and then he'd go home and convert that to a full exposition of the day's hearing. So just a wonderful capacity for writing little mnemonics. Also, the other thing is that he is able to record the legal details and write them down, but at the same time, the emotional circumstances. So he was able to point out that the manifestation of evil in the court, that in the hearing that we were at, Julian Assange hearing, the manifestation of evil in the oppression of Julian. You know, for example, Julian had to get on his knees in the dock and whisper through a slot in the glass into the ear of his barrister standing on her tiptoes in order to hear. So that circumstance, the emotions of that circumstance, Craig was able to fully grasp and report. It's very, very great talent. Indicates that you're dealing here with a man who's fully human, human.
Absolutely. You know, I remember watching him sitting next to you at the first segment of the two-part hearing, the one in Belmarsh before they moved to the Old Bailey. And you two were sitting side by side, not only during the hearing, but afterwards in the coffee shop. You two seem to have really bonded. It must be like crushing for you. I don't think there's a better advocate for your son, a more eloquent, a more consistent. I mean, John Pilger and Craig Murray, you know, 1 and 2 all the way. but what he has done to enlighten the public on the circumstances, the persecution of your son, and to now possibly lose that for the next 8 months, it must to you be a serious loss.
Oh, it's very distressing to see a friend and also a citizen of such capacity. There is the phenomena here that we must look at together someday in the future, that the strata of genius that the 20th century created, moving into the 21st century, a strata of genius in the Western world is being destroyed for state preferences and leading those states into a blind alley. That's something we ought to have a little meeting over. It's a phenomenon that has descended upon Julian Assange and now has descended upon the wonderful diarist of Scotland, Craig Murray. He's the equivalent of Samuel Pepys, who of course is the diarist that is well known for his observations of life in the 19th century. Fabulous people.
Well, thank you for reminding me of Pepys. I would say for your son, he's been the Emile Zola. He knows that your son has committed no crime. He's all the way through I've had him on this show going way back, and all the way through the last 5 years, even when he was facing time in jail, he has been out there as an outspoken, fervent critic of those who are oppressing Julian Assange. It says a lot about Craig Murray, doesn't it?
Yes, I reckon what we ought to do is when his appeal hearing comes up, because I'll be over there in Europe, you can zip over and meet, and we can meet in Edinburgh and get a palanquin and put it on our shoulders, you, me, and a couple of other stalwart Scottish friends, and carry on our shoulders in a palanquin Craig Murray down to the courthouse. We won't be oppressed by those blighters because it's a true friend and a true fighter, that Craig Murray.
Yeah, you guys really bonded well, aside from the writing that he's done on behalf of your son and his passionate support of Julian. You two really bonded. There's something about Craig Murray that is real, that is human, that you don't see in a lot of people. What really bonded you two together? Because I saw it both in the coffee shop and when you were sitting together.
Well, it's interesting because we were able to discuss the motives of the government and the manipulations and mischievous wickedness of the Judge Baritza. But at the same time, we were able to sit and have a cup of coffee and not say a word to each other and not feel uncomfortable. So those, you know how it is, Randy. If you have a friend that you're close to, that you bond with, you don't have to say much. But if there's something to say, they listen intently and fairly. So that's how the circumstances were.
Yeah, I felt the same way when I stayed with him for those 3 days with him and his wife and the Dara and son Cameron. And now they have a new son, a new kid. And here he is, 62 years old. He's in failing health, and the system is going after him. Do you think this is politically motive, or that's a rhetorical question. It is politically motive, isn't it?
Oh, completely. They have one reporter who speaks truthfully and eloquently in all of Scotland who's popular, just one. His name's Craig Murray. And their foolishness, they decide to destroy him, leaving them themselves in a, government can't continue in an air of delusion and self-interest. The interests are the people, not those silly ideas that they've got to remain united with the United Kingdom forever and a day simply because they're going to get access to a white car, to get access to a state funeral in a white car. That's
Well,
what their reward will be.
That is truth of the highest power. I must say that now we have a dual problem. We were just focusing on Julian. Now we got to focus on Craig. I did this series called Assange Countdown to Freedom, which we're continuing. And what am I going to do? A Murray Countdown to Freedom? Our hands are tied behind our back and we're fighting. But what do you foresee? What kind of movement did you foresee to extricate him from this legal quagmire and get him back on track, where he has been such an invaluable asset to the movement to free your son?
Well, I just think that, we ought to, when we go over there to Scotland, we'll put some organisational effort into putting together a simple and effective organisation to fight for Craig's freedom and for and that'll be a real pleasure. So that organisation that we've put together worldwide for Julian will turn the heavy guns onto the Salmon administration. Sorry, not the Salmon administration. There's so many fishes in Scotland. The Sturgeon administration.
Yeah, Sturgeon. Yes. Right. You're fishing for words here. No, I'm fishing. Sturgeon, so it's good. What's great that you have, and I realized this in January when you visited me and Gabriel up in Woodstock. What a great sense of humor you've been able to maintain. Craig Murray has an incredible sense of humor, and your son, in spite of everything he has gone through, has a great sense of humor. How important is it? How do people maintain a sense of humor in such a dire situation?
Oh, well, there's a lot of comedy in it because you and I and Craig principally Craig and Julian, they take on an enormous task, and to defend them, we take on a task so big and so vast that it's like holding a candle to the sun. So it's pretty comic in a lot of ways, but progressively over time, it's history has seen that we're on the right side. So the worldwide movement for the support of Julian Assange is manifests itself that the journalist is, in the White House press meetings the day before yesterday, a simple journalist like Julian Assange, who writes truthfully, is a subject matter for questions to the White House spokesperson, Jen Psaki, by the New York Post.
I saw that.
That's really important. So we've pushed this thing right up to the very tops, very height of the concerns of the White House, that there are questions asked at White House press briefings. So we would hope to continue to do that with Julian and do the same with Craig.
All right. Well, you got a lot on your plate right now. I hope that you come back to the U.S. real soon and continue. You were here and advocating for Julian's release. I think things are going in the right direction. I think that he's, with changes in the Justice Department, that the people that I know that are in the Justice Department, like Vanita Gupta, who I worked with for 3 years in the civil rights, she's number 3 in line behind the Attorney General. And I can't imagine that she would allow, or she wouldn't be advocating that your son be released. It would be a real dark day for the Justice Department and the U.S. To continue this intimidation and this institution.
Andy, the William Barr administration of the Department of Justice has brought upon the United States a terrible mess, and every court case in London further exposes the manipulations that William Barr and his friends in the CIA went through to bring about a case against Julian. The gold of the United States, the pure gold, is the First Amendment. And every country in the world looks to the First Amendment and hopes to see it in their own legislation. For the United States to destroy it in the face of the world and have the world watch as it unbundles the pure gold in its Constitution is really very distressing. So I guess Merrick Garland and your friend will go about fixing that up. As for Craig Murray, we join with you distressed to see that the state has turned against another of its geniuses, and we will join him in his fight and send our warmth and love to his family.
Well, I'm not going to follow that. You got the last word, John Shipton. Thank you for your time here, and thank you for all of the work on Beat. Well, of course, you're going to do it anyway for your son and for Craig Murray and for those who speak truth. You certainly are a godsend to this entire movement for freedom of the press. And we hope to see you very soon upstate for another steak. And we can
We'll be there on the 30th of May. So
right. I'll be waiting for you. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, John Shipton, thank you very much. We're going to go out now. Here is Lotta Lania and September Song. Thank you very much. This is Randy Credico live on the fly, 99.5 FM WBAI in New York City. See you on Wednesday. Thank you, folks.
Oh, it's a long, long while from May till December, and the days grow short when you reach September, when the autumn weather turns the leaves to flame. One hasn't got time for the waiting game, for the days dwindle down to a precious few. September, November, and these few precious days I'll spend with you. These precious days